Okay, I just wanted to start by saying that there's many things already said, and I wanted to quote Tom in particular when he quite directly talked about how the UNCAC is pretty much out of date with where the world is right now. And I think one of the big issues that the UNGAS actually faces and the huge challenge that it faces is everything some of the speakers already spoke about, which is protection of investigative journalists, whistleblowers, looking at procurement, looking at the whole issue of tackling impunity, etc. But central to this whole thing is really to understand where we are. And I tried to put everything in one slide, including a picture, to actually describe a case study. And within that case study, I think we'd be able to pick some of the important issues that's quite missing in the political declaration. So for one, to understand what we're talking about, what do we mean by grand corruption? It's grand scale corrupt practices that involves grand scale thievery, siphoning off of money, and it involves multiple actors. I mean, we know also now that it involves multiple jurisdictions, international banks, law firms, all of them actually are complicit in many ways in helping hide stolen funds in offshore accounts, channel them through shell companies, etc. And I understand Transparency International has done a lot of work in trying to define, putting a legal definition to grand corruption. But that picture below is something that I wanted all of us to capture tonight, is that Malaysia contributed, fairly small economy in Southeast Asia, a growing one. It contributed to one of the largest financial scandals in the world in recent history. And how could it actually happen? It's because of the failure of domestic institutions that actually allowed money to fly across borders. We had a prime minister who was also the finance minister at that time, and so he had ultimate power. So when we asked questions in parliament, that was the beginning. Many voices were actually shut off. We went through the usual rounds of harassment, intimidation, etc. And then the Wall Street Journal exposed a large-scale investigative piece on how much money was actually missing, and that 700 million had actually gone, 700 million US dollars had actually gone into the personal bank account of the prime minister. And then the story got out of hand. And it was really important to see that internationally, this was becoming big news, but locally, all levels of trying to expose, speak up, trying to actually build awareness around this issue was completely shut off. And this is where I think that important role of protecting investigative journalists, there were many who were arrested, civil society activists. One was even arrested under national security laws on the pretext of receiving money from George Soros to organize mass rallies and so on. So everything all the speakers spoke about were being felt by the Malaysian people. Were completely oppressed. But we have to thank the international journalists from Wall Street Journal, Claire Rucastle-Brown, and so on and so forth. And most of all, this picture here was when the Attorney General of the United States held a press conference to talk about the 1MDB and how the 1MDB had been used to abuse the United States financial system. So there were more than 500 assets that were bought with stolen money, including funding a Hollywood movie called The Wolf on Wall Street. So we're talking about Academy Award actors like Leonardo DiCaprio being given stolen Marlon Brando awards as part of his lure to be able to star in the role of that show called The Wolf on Wall Street and so on. And little did we know that Malaysian people actually paid for that movie to be produced in Hollywood. So the entire scandal broke out into the world. From the United States, it went into offshore accounts, it went into multiple banks, it went everywhere. And it went to all of the countries that many of us are actually coming from and talking about and trying to protect our financial systems. But here is the case. And I think this is where the political declaration of the Angas has failed to tackle the real issue around grand corruption. Um, it, it circles around it, but it doesn't actually put its finger on what kind of commitment governments and states should actually take. And when I read the political declaration, I was thinking, well, it's probably very much expected because it's really these governments themselves who require that kind of power and space and a high level of impunity to play with money. And it's really all about money, and it's really all about power, and it's all about greed. And the less scrutiny, the less laws around tightening enforcement and strengthening the international cooperation system, the better it is for them to actually put whatever agenda that they have to ensure that these financial schemes can continue without too much scrutiny from citizens, from civil society, from people around the globe. So I'm just saying that for us today, we need to actually look at rethinking a new strategy. We can ask the governments to do many things. The action points that are put out on the right hand of the slide. The FACTI panel had come up with excellent recommendations, but it also didn't quite hit the nail in the coffin on how to actually tackle their grand corruption. What is required for international cooperation? When we talk about an anti-corruption court, what do we mean by that? So the UNCTAD coalition has proposed a multilateral task force to be formed to also include civil society. I think those are very, very important steps that this first session against corruption can really commit to. But there is so much more that we as civil society also need to start rethinking strategies around how do we make lawyers, bankers, accountants, many of the people that we know and we have networks with, a lot more aware and accountable, how they can be sanctioned with domestic laws if they were actually complicit to the crimes of corruption. How can we actually work around that to bring some kind of shame on their professional career, on different aspects of how we can look at corruption, rather than just depending on governments to take the commitment to fight grand corruption. Because in conclusion, I just wanted to say that it may be the most difficult group of people to get any kind of commitment or build a commitment from. Of course, for national policies on beneficial registries, access to information laws, etc., we do have to engage many of them, but it also is about alternative power on our side, about how is it that we can tackle many different target groups of people that require assistance, protection, and a warning also that their professional career could be ruined forever if there's more expose around the kind of actions and work that they continue to take in facilitating grand corruption. Thank you.